My name is Darian Taylor, 68 years old, and losing my daughter Linda was like losing the sun from my sky. Nothing prepared me for the darkness that followed. Living with my son-in-law Patrick became unbearable after she passed, but I never expected him to pack my belongings and demand I leave 30 minutes after we buried my only child. As I walked away from what he claimed was now his house, I smiled knowingly. Some secrets reveal themselves at the perfect moment. Tell me where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how a grieving father found justice when a greedy son-in-law learned the shocking truth at the will reading. Construction was my life for over 40 years. I built homes, office buildings, and eventually ran my own small but successful company. I took pride in creating spaces where families would make memories, never imagining how important one particular house would become in my own story. My wife Sarah and I had Linda late in life. She was our miracle, arriving after years of thinking parenthood might not be in our cards. Sarah was the love of my life, a kindergarten teacher with a laugh that could light up the darkest room. When Linda was only 7, Sarah was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. Within 8 months, I became a widower, raising a young daughter alone. Those early years were tough. I would wake up at 5 in the morning, make Linda breakfast and pack her lunch, drop her at school, work a full day at construction sites, then rush to pick her up and help with homework. Many nights I fell asleep with building plans spread across the kitchen table, exhausted but determined to give her the life Sarah would have wanted for her. Linda grew into her mother every day. She had Sarah's amber eyes, her kindness, and that same musical laugh. As a teenager, she never gave me the trouble my friends with daughters warned about. Instead, she was my rock. She would pack my lunch, help organize my paperwork, and always had a pot of coffee ready when I came home covered in sawdust and cement. When Linda decided to become a doctor, I nearly burst with pride. My girl, who had watched her mother slip away despite the best medical care, wanted to help others fight their battles. I worked extra jobs and longer hours to help with her tuition, though she won scholarships that covered most expenses. Those years were full of phone calls about anatomy classes and clinical rotations. I understood little of the medical terminology she excitedly shared, but I listened to every word. She met Patrick during her residency at Massachusetts General Hospital. He was an investment banker who came to the ER with a sprained wrist after a tennis match. I remember the day she called to tell me about him. There was a new tone in her voice, a breathlessness I recognized from my own courtship with Sarah. 6 months into their relationship, Linda brought Patrick home to meet me. He arrived in an expensive car, wearing a tailored suit and a watch that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. Something about his smile never quite reached his eyes. When he talked about his work, it was all about deals and profits, never about helping people or building something meaningful. But Linda looked at him like he hung the moon, so I kept my reservations to myself. Their wedding was elaborate, held at a country club with 400 guests, most of whom I had never met. Patrick insisted on paying for everything, making a show of his financial success. Linda seemed happy, though I noticed she looked tired, trying to balance her medical residency with Patrick planning what he called a wedding worthy of their status. What no one knew, not even Linda, was that I had been saving for years to give them something special. While Patrick was making arrangements for the perfect honeymoon and talking about looking for their first home, I quietly contacted a real estate agent. I found a beautiful colonial house in a good neighborhood, close enough to the hospital for Linda, but with enough space for the family they talked about starting. The day before their wedding, I met Patrick for lunch. I told him I wanted to contribute to their future and handed him an envelope containing $100,000 in cashier checks. His eyes widened as I explained it was for their house down payment. What I did not tell him was that I had already purchased the house outright, and while the money I gave him would indeed go toward it, the deed remained in my name. I had arranged with my lawyer to have Patrick make payments to a special account that would accumulate for their future children. It was unconventional, I know, but something in my gut told me to maintain a safety net for my daughter. Patrick thanked me profusely, shaking my hand firmly while telling me he would handle everything. Linda never knew about our arrangement. As far as she was concerned, Patrick had secured their beautiful home through his financial savvy. The first few years of their marriage, I kept my distance, wanting to give them space to build their life together. Linda became an attending physician, specializing in emergency medicine. Patrick rose through the ranks at his bank. They seemed happy whenever I visited, though I noticed Patrick spent a lot of time on his phone, even during our family dinners. When I turned 65, arthritis in my hands and back forced me to sell my construction business. The house I had lived in since Sarah died felt too big, too empty. During a Sunday call, Linda suggested I move in with them. Their house had a comfortable guest suite on the first floor, perfect for me as climbing stairs became more difficult. Patrick seemed surprisingly agreeable when Linda proposed the idea. Now I understand he likely believed the house was solely his property, bought with his money and my contribution. He probably thought having me there was a small price to pay for what he viewed as my financial support years earlier. I moved in 3 years ago, bringing only personal belongings and photographs. My furniture went into storage, my tools to a former apprentice who had become like a son to me. Linda set up my room with a new television and comfortable chair. She put photos of Sarah on the dresser and hung one of my favorite landscape paintings on the wall. For a brief moment, it felt like I had found a new home. The first few months of living with Linda and Patrick were pleasant enough. We settled into a rhythm of family dinners when their schedules allowed, weekend breakfasts, and occasional movie nights. Linda worked long shifts at the hospital, often coming home exhausted but still taking time to check on me. Patrick worked long hours too, frequently bringing work home and sequestering himself in his home office until late at night. When both of them were busy, I found ways to make myself useful. I maintained the yard, something Patrick had little interest in. I fixed leaky faucets, wobbly chairs, and the 1,000 little things that homes need. Having built houses my entire career, I could spot problems before they became serious. I took pride in keeping the property in top condition, though I never mentioned that I was actually maintaining my own investment. Linda appreciated my efforts, always thanking me with genuine gratitude. Patrick, however, began showing his true colors about 6 months into our arrangement. It started with small comments at dinner. "Would you mind not running the dishwasher until it is completely full?" "The water bill was unusually high last month," Patrick said one evening, looking pointedly at me. Linda jumped in immediately. "Dad barely uses any water, Patrick. If anything, my long showers are the culprit." "I just want us to be mindful of expenses," he replied smoothly. "After all, we are supporting an additional person now." The comment hung in the air. Linda put down her fork, her expression darkening. "I am not going to have this conversation again. My father is not a burden. This is his home too." I cleared my throat, trying to ease the tension. "I can certainly be more careful with utilities. I know running a household is expensive." That was just the beginning. Patrick began commenting on the groceries I would buy, suggesting cheaper alternatives even though I paid for my own food. He complained about the television being too loud when I watched my programs, despite my hearing loss making it necessary. The garage became a battleground when he claimed my tool bench took up too much space, forcing him to park his luxury car in the driveway overnight. As the months passed, Linda found herself playing mediator more often. I would overhear their arguments through the vents, Patrick insisting I was taking advantage of their generosity. Linda defending my presence with increasing frustration in her voice. "He is my father, Patrick, my only family. Would you rather he live alone and fall with no one to help him?" "There are perfectly good senior communities for people his age," Patrick would counter. "Places with medical staff and activities. He would probably be happier there, around people his own age." Their fights grew more frequent. Linda would emerge from their bedroom with reddened eyes. Patrick would leave for work without saying goodbye. I began spending more time in my room, trying to minimize my presence, hoping to reduce the strain on their marriage. One Saturday morning, about a year after I moved in, Patrick approached me while Linda was at the hospital covering a weekend shift. "Darian," he said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "I think we need to discuss some practical matters." I put down my newspaper, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "What sort of matters?" "Linda and I have been talking about starting a family soon," he began, though I knew from overhearing their arguments that Linda wanted children, but Patrick kept delaying. "This house only has 3 bedrooms. If we have a baby, we would need your room for a nursery." "I see," I said carefully. "Have you looked into adding an extension? The property has plenty of space, and with my background, I could help manage the project, save you some money." Patrick frowned. "We are not interested in major construction projects right now. We were thinking more along the lines of finding you alternative living arrangements." I felt a chill despite the warm spring morning. Linda knows about this conversation? He hesitated just long enough for me to know he was lying. We have discussed options, yes. There is a very nice assisted living community about 20 minutes from here. We could visit you often. That evening, when Linda came home, I gently mentioned Patrick's suggestion. Her face flushed with anger. He said, "What?" She stormed upstairs, and I heard their bedroom door slam. Raised voices followed, too muffled to make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Later, Linda came to my room with tears in her eyes. "Please do not move out, Dad. This is your home. I want you here. Patrick will come around, I promise." I hugged my daughter, this wonderful woman who had her mother's sense of justice and compassion, but I worried about the strain my presence was putting on her marriage. "I could find a small apartment nearby," I suggested. "We could still see each other often." "No," Linda insisted, wiping her eyes. "Mom would never forgive me if I let that happen. We promised to take care of each other, remember?" I remembered. In the final days of Sarah's illness, my wife had made both of us promise to stay close, to be each other's family no matter what. It was a promise I never considered breaking, and apparently neither did Linda. As the second year of our living arrangement continued, Patrick grew more distant. He worked later, traveled more for business, and when home, barely acknowledged my presence. Linda tried to maintain family harmony, organizing Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations, but the tension was palpable. I offered multiple times to move out, but Linda always refused. We had a particularly honest conversation on my 67th birthday after Patrick begged off from the small celebration Linda had planned, claiming a work emergency. "Why do you stay with him?" I finally asked my daughter as we shared cake at the kitchen table. "You deserve someone who treats you with more respect." Linda looked down at her plate. "Marriage is complicated, Dad. Patrick has good qualities too. He can be generous and ambitious. He works hard. But does he make you happy?" She hesitated too long before answering. "I made vows, Dad. For better or worse. We are just going through a rough patch. Things will get better." I did not push further, but I worried more than ever. Linda looked tired all the time, working long hospital shifts, then coming home to emotional coldness. I started noticing how she would check her phone before speaking, how she seemed to measure her words carefully around Patrick. These were warning signs I recognized from counseling some of my employees through difficult marriages over the years. As my second year in their home ended, Patrick began leaving financial documents in prominent places. Retirement home brochures appeared on the coffee table. Printouts about Social Security benefits and Medicare nursing home coverage were left in the kitchen. It was a passive-aggressive campaign to make me feel unwelcome without having to directly confront me again after Linda's reaction to his first attempt. I started researching apartments, planning to move out despite Linda's objections. I could not bear watching my daughter torn between her loyalty to me and her commitment to her increasingly hostile husband. I had nearly worked up the courage to insist on moving when tragedy struck, changing everything in the blink of an eye. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in October. Linda had worked a 12-hour shift and was driving home in a heavy downpour. According to the police report, a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel, crossed the center line, and hit her car head-on. She died instantly. The officer who came to the door said she did not suffer, as if that could somehow lessen the devastation of the news. I felt my world collapse in that moment. My beautiful daughter, my only child, the last living connection to Sarah, was gone. Patrick received the news standing next to me, his face pale with shock. For a brief moment, our mutual grief bridged the chasm between us. He sat heavily on the sofa, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. The days that followed passed in a blur of arrangements. The funeral home, the cemetery plot next to Sarah, the obituary that could never capture the vibrant woman Linda had been. Patrick handled most of the administrative details while I sat numbly in my room, surrounded by photos of my daughter at different ages, wondering how I could possibly survive this second unbearable loss. Linda's funeral was well attended. Her colleagues from the hospital spoke about her skill as a physician, her compassion for patients. Neighbors talked about her kindness. Several of Patrick's business associates came, offering stiff condolences. Throughout the service, Patrick maintained the appropriate demeanor of a grieving husband. He held my arm as we walked to the graveside, supporting me when my legs nearly gave out at the sight of the casket. After the service, people gathered at the house. Platters of food appeared, brought by well-meaning friends and neighbors. I could not eat, could not engage in the quiet conversations happening around me. I sat in my chair, accepting condolences with nods, unable to find words. As the last visitors departed, something shifted in Patrick's demeanor. The grieving husband facade slipped away, replaced by a cold efficiency I had never seen before. He moved through the house collecting used plates and glasses, wiping down surfaces, as if erasing all evidence of the gathering and, by extension, Linda. I went to bed early, emotionally exhausted. The next morning, I found Patrick in the kitchen, dressed in his business suit, drinking coffee and reviewing documents at the table. "You are going to work?" I asked, surprised. It had only been a day since we buried Linda. "Life goes on," Patrick replied without looking up. "The markets do not stop for personal tragedies." I made myself a cup of coffee and sat across from him, trying to process how differently we were handling our grief. While I could barely function, he appeared determined to resume normal routines immediately. "Perhaps we could have dinner together tonight," I suggested. "Talk about Linda, share some memories." Patrick finally looked up from his papers, his expression unreadable. "Actually, Darian, I wanted to talk to you about practical matters." The same phrase he had used before when suggesting I move to a retirement home. A chill ran through me. "What practical matters?" He folded his hands on the table, his wedding ring catching the morning light. "This living arrangement was always meant to be temporary. Linda wanted you here, and I respected her wishes. But circumstances have changed." My throat tightened. "Are you asking me to move out?" "Not asking," he said, his voice businesslike. "I am informing you that I will be making changes now that Linda is gone. This house is too big for two people who barely tolerate each other. I need to move forward with my life." I stared at him, stunned by the callousness. "We just buried your wife. My daughter. Yesterday." Patrick checked his watch. "I am aware of the timing, but pragmatically speaking, there is no reason for you to remain here. I will be traveling more for work, possibly relocating. The house will likely go on the market in the spring." I tried to process what he was saying. "Linda has only been gone a few days. Can we not take some time before making such decisions?" His jaw tightened. "I have made my decision. You have had a free living situation for nearly 3 years. That arrangement ended when Linda died." "Free?" I repeated, anger finally breaking through my grief. "I have contributed to this household in countless ways. I have maintained this property, handled repairs that would have cost you thousands." Patrick stood, straightening his tie. "The fact remains, this is my house, and I no longer wish to share it. I have called a cab to take you to work. When I return this evening, I expect we can discuss the timeline for your departure." He left without another word, the front door closing firmly behind him. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by memories of breakfasts with Linda, holiday meals, ordinary moments that now seemed precious beyond measure. How could he be so cold, so calculating? We had both lost the person we loved most in the world. I spent the day in a daze, moving through the house, touching Linda things. Her medical journals still stacked on the desk in the home office, her gardening gloves hanging by the back door, her favorite coffee mug in the cabinet. Each item a small piece of her presence, each one precious to me. When Patrick returned that evening, he carried a large suitcase, which he placed at the bottom of the stairs. I was sitting in the living room, looking through a photo album. "I have been thinking about our conversation this morning," I began. "Perhaps we could establish a timeline that works for both of us. Give me a few months to find appropriate housing, and—" "That will not be necessary," Patrick interrupted. "I need you to leave tonight." The photo album slipped from my hands. "Tonight? That is impossible. Where would I go?" Patrick checked his watch, a gesture I had come to despise. "You have 30 minutes to pack your essential belongings. You can make arrangements to collect the rest of your things later." I stood up, finding strength in my sudden anger. "This was my daughter home. You cannot simply throw me out after her funeral." Patrick's face hardened. "My wife is dead. This house is mine now. I have no obligation to you anymore, legally or morally. 30 minutes, Darian. Then I want you gone." He turned and walked to his home office, closing the door behind him. I stood in the living room, shaking with a mixture of grief and rage. This was the man my daughter had married. This was the man she had defended and stayed loyal to, even when I questioned her happiness. Moving on autopilot, I went to my room and began packing. Clothes in one bag, medications and toiletries in another, photos of Sarah and Linda, a few books, my wallet and phone. How does one pack a life in 30 minutes? At the 29-minute mark, Patrick reappeared, standing in the doorway of my room. Time is up. I looked around at the room that had been my home for 3 years, at all the things I would have to leave behind. Without a word, I picked up my 2 bags and walked toward the front door. As I stepped onto the porch, Patrick spoke from behind me. "The locks will be changed tomorrow. If you need to collect your remaining belongings, contact me to arrange a time." I turned to look at him, this man who had shown his true character in the wake of tragedy. Despite everything, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. A small smile formed on my lips. Patrick narrowed his eyes. "What are you smiling about?" "Some truths take time to reveal themselves," I said quietly. "I will see you at the will reading next week." "What will reading?" Patrick asked, confusion crossing his face. "Linda Lawyer will be in touch," I replied, stepping off the porch toward the waiting taxi. "I suspect you will find it illuminating." As the taxi pulled away, I watched Patrick standing in the doorway of the house he thought was his expression a mixture of suspicion and uncertainty. For the first time since losing Linda, I felt a small spark of something other than grief. Perhaps it was justice approaching on the horizon. The taxi driver asked where I wanted to go. I had no answer ready. My life had been reduced to 2 bags and nowhere to call home. I gave him the address of a budget hotel near the interstate, a place I had passed hundreds of times but never imagined staying in. The room was small and impersonal, faded floral bedspread, laminate furniture, and a television that only got 4 channels clearly. I sat on the edge of the bed, bags still packed at my feet, and let the reality of my situation sink in. At 68 years old, I was essentially homeless. My daughter was gone forever, and I had been discarded by her husband like an unwanted piece of furniture. Sleep did not come that night. I lay awake cycling through grief, anger, and anxiety about my future. By morning, I knew I needed help. I scrolled through contacts on my phone and called Thomas Warren, my friend of 40 years. We had worked construction together before I started my own company, and he had been at Linda's funeral just days before. "Darian?" His voice was thick with sleep. "It is barely 6 in the morning. Tom, I am sorry to call so early, but I need help," I said, my voice breaking. "Patrick kicked me out last night." "He what?" Thomas was fully awake now. "After the funeral? Jesus Christ! What is wrong with that man?" I explained what had happened. Thomas cursed colorfully, then insisted I come stay with him and his wife Barbara immediately. Within an hour, he pulled up outside the hotel in his pickup truck. "This is temporary," I told him as we drove to his house in the suburbs. "Just until I figure things out." Thomas shook his head. "Stay as long as you need. Barbara already making up the guest room. That son of a bitch throwing you out like that. What about all your stuff?" "He said I could arrange to pick it up later," I replied, staring out the window at the familiar streets of the town where I had lived most of my life. "I need to talk to Linda Lawyer first. There are things Patrick does not know." Thomas glanced at me curiously but did not press for details. Barbara met us at the door with a hug and tears in her eyes. They had known Linda since she was a little girl, had watched her grow up, attended her wedding. Their kindness nearly broke me again. After settling into their guest room and accepting a plate of Barbara homemade pancakes, I made a phone call to James Brown, the attorney who had handled my legal affairs for decades. His secretary put me through immediately. "Darian, I was going to call you today," James said. "I was so sorry to hear about Linda. I just could not believe it when I saw the obituary." "Thank you, James. I need to see you as soon as possible. It is about the house, and Linda will. Can you come in this afternoon? I have an opening at 3. "I will be there." Thomas insisted on driving me to the appointment, waiting in the reception area while I met with James. The law office was familiar territory, a place where I had signed my will, handled the paperwork for my construction business, and arranged the secret purchase of the house that Patrick now claimed was his. James rose from behind his desk when I entered, offering a firm handshake and genuine condolences. We had known each other since college, had raised our families in the same neighborhood. He knew Sarah, had watched Linda grow up alongside his own children. "Tell me what is going on," he said after we were seated. "You mentioned the house?" I explained everything, from Patrick's behavior over the years to being thrown out with 30 minutes' notice after the funeral. James' expression darkened as I spoke. "That is reprehensible," he said when I finished. "But am I correct in understanding that Patrick does not know you are the legal owner of the house?" "That is right," I confirmed. "When I gave him money for what he thought was the down payment, the deed was already in my name. Linda knew I contributed financially but thought Patrick handled the transaction. She never knew the full truth." James pulled a file from his cabinet. "Let me confirm everything is still in order," he said, reviewing the documents. "Yes, the property at 54 Maple Street is solely in your name, Darian. There has never been any transfer of ownership. And Linda will?" James opened another file. "Linda came to see me about 6 months ago to update her will. She left personal items and her savings to Patrick, but she also included provisions for you." "What kind of provisions?" "I had no idea Linda had updated her will. She established a trust to ensure you would always have a home in the house. She was concerned about Patrick trying to force you out someday." I felt a wave of emotion. Even in planning for a possibility she hoped would never happen, Linda had tried to protect me. "So what happens now?" I asked. James leaned back in his chair. "First, we need to schedule the will reading. Patrick needs to be present to understand the legal realities. Second, since you are the legal owner of the property, Patrick has no right to prevent you from entering your own home or to evict you." I thought about Patrick changing the locks. What if he refuses to acknowledge my ownership? "We have all the documentation here," James assured me. "The original deed, property tax records showing payments from your account. Everything. If he contests it, we have an airtight case." We set the will reading for the following Tuesday, giving James time to officially notify Patrick. As I left the office, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Vindication that justice would be served, but also sadness that it had come to this. Linda would have been heartbroken to see how quickly Patrick had revealed his true nature. The next few days at Thomas and Barbara House gave me time to process my grief and prepare for the confrontation to come. I visited Linda grave, sitting beside the fresh earth for hours, talking to her and Sarah as if they could hear me. I told them I missed them desperately. I promised to honor Linda's memory by standing up for myself against Patrick manipulations. Barbara helped me shop for a new suit for the will reading, insisting I needed to look my best. Thomas offered moral support and practical advice, suggesting I remain calm no matter what Patrick might say or do. The night before the will reading, I could not sleep. I imagined various scenarios, how Patrick might react, what he might say. I rehearsed responses in my mind, determined to maintain my dignity. By morning, I felt prepared for whatever might happen. This was not about revenge, I told myself. It was about justice and honoring Linda's wishes. Thomas drove me to James' office, promising to wait as long as necessary. As we pulled into the parking lot, we saw Patrick's expensive car already there. "Do you want me to come in with you?" Thomas asked. I shook my head. "This is something I need to face alone." "Call me when it is over," he said, squeezing my shoulder. "Remember, whatever happens in there, you have friends who care about you." I straightened my tie, took a deep breath, and walked toward the building, ready to reclaim what was rightfully mine. James' Brown office occupied the entire second floor of a colonial-style building in the heart of downtown. The reception area featured dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and discreet lighting, giving it an atmosphere of quiet authority. The receptionist, Agnes, had worked for James for as long as I could remember. She greeted me warmly, her eyes showing sympathy behind her professional smile. "Mr. Taylor, Mr. Brown is expecting you. Mr. Reynolds is already in the conference room." "Thank you, Agnes," I replied, feeling my heart rate increase at the mention of Patrick. She led me down the hallway to the large conference room at the end. When she opened the door, I saw Patrick sitting at the far end of the mahogany table, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I entered, his expression immediately hardening. James sat at the head of the table, surrounded by neat stacks of documents. He stood to greet me, gesturing to a chair opposite Patrick. "Thank you for coming, Darian," he said formally, maintaining the professional atmosphere. "Now that both parties are present, we can begin." I sat down, noticing Patrick's impeccable suit, his perfectly knotted tie, his manicured nails, always the picture of success and control. He did not offer a greeting, merely watched me with cold eyes. James cleared his throat. "We are here today for the reading of Linda Ann Reynolds' will," he began, his voice taking on an official tone. "Before I begin, I want to express my condolences to both of you on your loss. Linda was an exceptional person. Can we get on with this? Patrick interrupted. I have a meeting at 11. James gave him a measured look. This is a legal proceeding, Mr. Reynolds. It will take as long as necessary to properly execute your late wife's wishes. Patrick sighed dramatically, but gestured for James to continue. The attorney opened a folder and began reading. I, Linda Ann Reynolds, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament. The legal language washed over me as James read through the standard opening sections. Patrick maintained a posture of impatient attention, occasionally checking his watch or glancing at his silent phone. James continued. To my husband, Patrick James Reynolds, I leave my personal jewelry collection, with the exception of items specifically designated below. I also leave him my personal savings account at First National Bank, my retirement accounts, and our joint investment portfolio. Patrick nodded, as if these bequests were only what he expected. To my father, Darian Robert Taylor, I leave my mother wedding and engagement rings, and the pearl necklace that has been in our family for 3 generations. I also leave him my personal library of books, my collection of family photographs, and the painting of Cape Cod that hung in our living room, which he admired. Small items, sentimental things that I would treasure, because they connected me to Linda and Sarah. Patrick seemed uninterested in these bequests, clearly waiting for the larger assets to be addressed. James adjusted his glasses. Regarding the property at 54 Maple Street, I wish to clarify the following. Patrick leaned forward slightly, his attention fully engaged now. While my husband Patrick Reynolds has resided at this property and contributed to its upkeep, I acknowledge that the legal owner of the property is and has always been my father, Darian Taylor. The words hung in the air. Patrick's face froze, his expression caught between confusion and disbelief. What did you say? He asked, his voice unnaturally quiet. James continued reading, as if Patrick had not spoken. My father graciously allowed us to live in his property while maintaining ownership. It is my wish that my father retain full rights to his property and determine its future use according to his own wishes. Patrick slammed his hand on the table. This is absurd. That house is mine. I paid for it. James set down the will and looked directly at Patrick. Mr. Reynolds, the house has never been in your name. Mr. Taylor purchased it outright before your marriage to Linda. He provided you with funds that you believed were for a down payment, but the deed has always remained in his name. That cannot be legal, Patrick said, his face flushing with anger. I have been paying the mortgage for years. James opened another folder. There is no mortgage, Mr. Reynolds. The house was purchased with cash. The payments you have been making were directed to an account established by Mr. Taylor intended to benefit any children you and Linda might have had. Patrick turned to me, his eyes blazing. You tricked me? You let me believe I owned that house for all these years? I met his gaze calmly. I wanted to provide a home for my daughter without hurting your pride. Linda never knew the full arrangement either. I only wanted her to be secure. James cleared his throat. I have here the original deed, showing Mr. Taylor as the sole owner. I also have property tax records showing payments from Mr. Taylor's account for the past 8 years. The legal situation is quite clear. He slid the documents across the table. Patrick barely glanced at them, his hands clenched into fists on the polished wood. You conniving old man, he spat. You have been living in my house, eating my food, while secretly owning the property? Does this seem ethical to you? He directed this last question to James. The lawyer remained professionally neutral. The ethics of family financial arrangements are not for me to judge, Mr. Reynolds. My concern is the legal reality, which is unambiguous. The property belongs to Mr. Taylor and has since before your marriage. Patrick pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. This is fraud. I will contest this. On what grounds? James asked mildly. There was no misrepresentation in the legal documentation. You never requested to see the deed, never conducted a title search. You assumed ownership without verification. The blood drained from Patrick's face as the reality of his situation began to sink in. For years, he had believed himself to be a homeowner, the provider, the one in control. Now he was learning that the very foundation of his perceived success had been built on my generosity. So all this time, he said slowly, looking at me with dawning comprehension, when you were fixing things around the house, Maintaining the yard. I was maintaining my own property, I confirmed. I never said otherwise. Patrick sank back into his chair, momentarily stunned into silence. James took the opportunity to continue with the will reading, but it was clear that Patrick was no longer listening. His world had just shifted beneath his feet. When James finished, he asked if either of us had questions. Patrick seemed to snap back to attention. "What happens now?" he demanded. "Am I supposed to just walk away from my home?" "That is up to Mr. Taylor," James replied. "As the legal owner, he has full rights to determine who resides in his property." All eyes turned to me. Despite everything Patrick had done, I felt no triumph in this moment, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. Linda would have been devastated by the entire situation. "I will need time to consider the best path forward," I said carefully. "In the meantime, I expect to return to my home without further incident." Patrick laughed bitterly. "Your home, of course. How convenient for you to reveal this now, after Linda is gone." I met his gaze steadily. "I did not reveal it. Linda did, in her will. She knew the truth, Patrick. She made provisions to ensure I would always have a place in that house, even though she never knew I actually owned it." "What does that tell you about how well she knew you?" He had no answer for that. James began gathering the documents, indicating our business was concluded. Patrick stood abruptly and walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. "This is not over," he said, looking back at me with cold determination. "I have resources, connections. You will not get away with this." After he left, James sighed deeply. "That went about as well as could be expected. Are you all right, Darian?" I nodded, though truthfully I felt exhausted. The confrontation had drained what little emotional energy I had left after days of grief. "What do you recommend I do now?" I asked my old friend. James leaned back in his chair. "Legally, you can return to your home immediately. If Patrick has indeed changed the locks, you are within your rights to have a locksmith let you in. If he refuses to leave, you could begin eviction proceedings, though that would be a lengthy and unpleasant process." "I do not want more conflict," I admitted. "I just want what is right." "Then give him some time," James suggested. "Let the reality sink in. Perhaps once he processes this information, you can reach a more civilized resolution." I thanked James for his help and left his office, stepping into the bright morning sunlight. Thomas was waiting in his truck, reading a newspaper. He looked up expectantly as I approached. "How did it go?" I slid into the passenger seat and let out a long breath. "Patrick just found out he has been living in my house for 8 years. Thomas whistled low. "I bet that went over like a lead balloon." "That is one way to put it," I said, feeling a strange urge to laugh despite everything. "Take me back to your place. I need to figure out what happens next." As we drove away from the law office, I glanced back once, half expecting to see Patrick watching me from the doorway. But the entrance was empty. Wherever he had gone, whatever he was planning, I knew this confrontation was far from over. 2 days after the will reading, Patrick called. I was still staying with Thomas and Barbara, using their guest room as a temporary refuge while deciding how to proceed. When I saw his name on my phone screen, my stomach tightened, but I knew this conversation was inevitable. "Darian," he said when I answered, his voice oddly subdued. "We need to talk." "I agree," I replied cautiously. "Not over the phone. Can you meet me at the house this afternoon, around 3? "I will be there." Thomas offered to drive me, concerned about what Patrick might do, but I declined. This was between Patrick and me now. I took a taxi instead, arriving at the house precisely at 3 o'clock. My house, I reminded myself as I walked up the familiar path to the front door. Patrick opened it before I could knock. He looked different somehow, less polished, with shadows under his eyes and wrinkles in his usually immaculate shirt. He stepped back wordlessly, allowing me to enter. The house felt strange, as if I were seeing it through new eyes. Photos of Linda that had adorned the walls were missing. Boxes were stacked in one corner of the living room. "You are packing," I observed. "Just sorting some things," Patrick replied, gesturing toward the sofa. "Please, sit down." I chose the armchair instead, my old favorite spot. Patrick remained standing, pacing slowly near the fireplace. "I have been thinking about our situation," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I believe there may have been some misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings?" I repeated. "The ownership of this house seems quite clear. According to the legal documents. Patrick waved his hand dismissively. Papers can be challenged, arrangements contested, but that is not why I asked you here today. He moved to sit on the couch, leaning forward with his hands clasped. Darian, I loved Linda. Whatever you might think of me, you must believe that. I studied his face, searching for sincerity. In all our years of knowing each other, this was perhaps the most direct personal statement he had ever made to me. Linda loved this house, he continued. She put her heart into making it a home. After giving it considerable thought, I believe she would want things to remain as they were. She would want you to stay here. I did not expect this approach. And how would that work exactly? We could continue as before, he suggested. You would have your room. I would have the rest of the house. We would find a way to coexist for Linda's sake. Something in his tone rang false. This sudden concern for Linda's wishes seemed calculated, especially after he had thrown me out with such cold efficiency. You seemed quite eager to be rid of me just a few days ago, I pointed out. What has changed? Patrick sighed, a picture of reluctant concession. I was emotional after the funeral. Grief makes people act irrationally. I regret how I handled things. I might have believed him if not for what Thomas had told me that morning. His friend Jack worked as a bartender at the country club Patrick frequented. According to Jack, Patrick had been there the previous night, drinking with a young woman who definitely was not grieving the loss of her husband-wife. How is Natalie? I asked casually. Patrick froze momentarily, his facade slipping. Who? Your companion from the country club last night, I clarified. Jack mentioned you seemed quite comfortable together. His expression hardened. You are having me watched now? Just a coincidence, I assured him. This is a small town, Patrick. People notice things, like how quickly a grieving widower finds comfort in the arms of another woman. What I do with my personal life is none of your business, he snapped, the pretense of reconciliation evaporating. It becomes my business when you use Linda's memory to manipulate me, I replied evenly. You do not want me here for Linda's sake. You want to maintain access to this house. Patrick stood abruptly. Fine. Let us stop pretending. This house is worth nearly $1 million in today's market. I have invested 8 years of my life here, made improvements, paid for maintenance. I deserve something for that. And there it was, the real reason for this meeting. Not grief, not respect for Linda's wishes, but money. You lived here rent-free for 8 years, I pointed out, in a house that was fully paid for. How much would you have spent renting a comparable property during that time? He paced again, agitation evident in every movement. What do you want, Darian? To throw me out like I threw you out? Is that your idea of justice? I considered his question seriously. What did I want? Revenge had never been my motivation, even after his cruel treatment. The house represented security, memories of Linda, and yes, a substantial financial asset, but it was also the setting for years of tension and unhappiness. I want what is fair, I said finally. You have 30 days to find new accommodation and move out. 30 days? Patrick repeated incredulously. That is impossible. Where am I supposed to go? I felt a strange sense of déjà vu, the same questions I had asked when he gave me 30 minutes to leave. That is not my problem, I replied, using his own words against him. The house is mine. I no longer wish to share it. Patrick's face flushed with anger. I could buy this house from you. Market value. Do you have $1 million? I asked, knowing from Linda that despite his apparent wealth, Patrick lived largely on credit, maintaining the appearance of success while accumulating debt. I can get financing, he insisted. Just give me time to arrange it. 30 days, I repeated firmly. If you can secure financing in that time, we can discuss a sale. If not, I expect the house to be vacated. He stared at me, calculation evident in his eyes. And if I refuse? If I contest the ownership legally? Then you will spend thousands on legal fees, I said calmly. James has already confirmed my position is legally unassailable. You would be delaying the inevitable and wasting your money. This was a calculated risk on my part. Patrick's identity was wrapped up in his image as a successful businessman. A protracted legal battle would be public, potentially embarrassing, and ultimately futile. He seemed to reach the same conclusion, his shoulders sagging slightly in defeat. Fine, 30 days. But I want first right of refusal if you decide to sell. Agreed, I said, standing to indicate our meeting was over. I will be staying with friends until you move out. Please do not damage anything that belongs to the house." Patrick laughed bitterly. "Do not worry. Your precious investment will remain intact." As I turned to leave, he called after me. "She never loved me as much as she loved you, you know. Every decision, every argument, it always came back to what Dad would think, what Dad would want." I paused at the door. "That was not true, and we both know it. Linda loved you completely. She defended you, supported you, believed in you, even when your actions did not deserve it. The tragedy is that you never fully appreciated what you had until it was gone." With those words, I left the house, walking down the path with a lighter heart than I had felt in weeks. The confrontation was over, and though the outcome was not perfect, it was just. True to my word, I gave Patrick 30 days. He tried several times to secure financing to buy the house, but his credit was overextended, and no bank would approve such a large loan given his debt-to-income ratio. 2 days before the deadline, a moving company arrived to pack his belongings. I drove by once during the moving process, watching from across the street as Patrick directed the movers with sharp gestures. Our eyes met briefly as he stood on the porch. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned away without acknowledgement. When the 30 days were up, Thomas drove me to the house. Patrick had left the keys in the mailbox with a terse note. "House is empty, utilities still connected. At least I gave you more than 30 minutes." I walked through each room slowly, reacquainting myself with the space that was now truly mine alone. Patrick had taken all the furniture, except for the pieces in my old room. The walls showed lighter patches where pictures had hung. The house felt hollow, emptied not just of possessions but of the life that had filled it. In Linda's old office, I found a small box she had labeled Dad Keepsakes. Inside were childhood drawings I had saved, photos of the three of us from happier times, and a letter she had written but apparently never given me. It was dated just 2 months before her death. "Dad," it began, "if you are reading this, we need to talk about the future. I am worried about you and Patrick. Things cannot continue as they are." The letter outlined her concerns about Patrick growing resentment and her fears that he might try to force me out someday. She mentioned speaking with James about legal protections for me. I sat on the floor of the empty room, clutching the letter, feeling both profound grief and gratitude that my daughter had seen the truth and tried to protect me, even as she hoped for reconciliation. In her final months, she had been caught between her love for her father and her commitment to her husband. An impossible position I would never have wished on her. That night, I slept in my old room, surrounded by empty spaces and memories. The house was mine again, but the victory felt hollow without Linda's presence. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of making it truly a home again. 1 year has passed since I reclaimed my house. The first few months were the hardest. Every room held echoes of Linda's laugh, reminders of her presence. I would wake in the middle of the night, certain I had heard her voice calling me from downstairs. The silence that answered was always crushing. Grief counselors talk about the stages of mourning, but they rarely mention how physical spaces become part of that process. This house, once a source of conflict, transformed into a sanctuary for my memories. I left Linda's room untouched for months, the door closed, preserving it exactly as she had left it. Barbara came over regularly those first few weeks, helping me clean and organize. Thomas and some of my old construction crew repainted the living room and kitchen, giving the spaces a fresh feeling while maintaining the character Linda had loved. Slowly, I began to reclaim the house as my own. The most difficult decision was what to do with Linda's room. 6 months after moving back in, I finally opened her door, sat on her bed, and had a long conversation with her photo. I told her how much I missed her, how empty the world felt without her bright spirit in it. And I asked her permission to transform her room into something new, something that would honor her memory while allowing me to move forward. The next day, I began converting the space into a memorial room of sorts. I displayed her medical school diploma, framed photos from various stages of her life, and created a small reading nook where I could sit surrounded by her presence. It became my favorite place in the house, a room where grief gradually transformed into peaceful remembrance. As for Patrick, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he purchased a condominium in a neighboring town. He and Natalie apparently became official shortly after he moved out. Linda colleagues at the hospital stopped inviting him to social events, his swift movement into a new relationship raising eyebrows in our close-knit community. I ran into him once at the grocery store about 8 months after everything happened. We stood awkwardly in the produce section, examining apples that suddenly seemed fascinating. "How are you, Darian?" he finally asked, his voice formal. "Managing," I replied honestly. "And you?" "Fine. Busy with work." The conversation might have ended there, but something compelled me to add, "I used part of my retirement savings to establish a scholarship in Linda's name. For medical students who want to work in emergency medicine." Patrick's expression softened momentarily. "She would have liked that." "Yes, I think she would." He hesitated, then said, "I kept her stethoscope, the one she used through medical school. I hope that was all right." It was the most human I had seen him since before Linda's death, this small admission of sentimentality. "She would want you to have it," I assured him. We nodded to each other and moved in opposite directions down the aisle, an appropriate metaphor for our lives. I felt no anger toward him anymore, just a distant sadness for what might have been if he had been capable of the love Linda deserved. Back at home, I continued the process of healing. I joined a grief support group at the community center, where I met others navigating similar journeys of loss. Among them was Eleanor, a retired schoolteacher who had lost her husband of 40 years to Alzheimer. Her gentle humor and profound insights helped me see that grief and joy could coexist, that moving forward did not mean leaving Linda behind. Eleanor and I became friends, then something more. Not romance exactly, but a companionship that filled some of the emptiness in my life. We attend concerts together, take day trips to museums, and share quiet dinners where we talk about our lost loved ones without apology or discomfort. She understands that my heart will always carry Sarah and Linda, just as I understand her ongoing love for her George. Last month, I made another significant decision. The house, while full of precious memories, was larger than I needed. After much reflection, I decided to sell it and downsize to a smaller place closer to town. But before listing it, I contacted Linda's former colleague Jessica, a young doctor with 3 children who had been Linda's friend. Jessica and her husband had been struggling to find affordable housing in our expensive area. I offered them the house at a substantial discount from market value, with one condition: that the down payment be donated to Linda's scholarship fund rather than paid to me. They accepted with tearful gratitude. Next month, they will move in, filling these rooms with children's laughter, creating new memories atop the foundation of old ones. Linda would approve, I think. She always believed homes should be full of life and love. As for me, I found a comfortable 2-bedroom condominium in a building with other active seniors. My new place has wide doorways to accommodate my aging knees, no stairs to navigate, and a small garden patio where I can still grow the tomatoes Linda and I used to plant together each spring. The greatest lesson I have learned through this journey is that justice and revenge are entirely different paths. Patrick lost the house, yes, but more importantly, he lost the opportunity to grow from his grief, to honor Linda's memory through positive action. His focus on possessions and appearances left him with neither in the end. True wealth, I have discovered, lies not in property deeds or bank accounts, but in how we love each other, how we honor those we have lost, and how we choose to move forward. The house was never just a building of wood and stone. It was a vessel for memories, for connections, for the intangible riches of family bonds. I sometimes wonder if Patrick ever realizes what he truly lost when he made his choices. Not a house, but the chance to be part of Linda's continuing legacy. The chance to transform grief into purpose, loss into meaning. I hope someday he finds the wisdom to see beyond material wealth to the deeper values that sustain us through life's darkest moments. As I pack my belongings for the move to my new home, I find myself at peace with the past. Linda's absence will always be a wound in my heart, but I have learned to live with that wound, to carry it gently rather than let it consume me. In doing so, I honor her more truly than any memorial or scholarship could. What would you do if faced with such betrayal at your most vulnerable moment? Would you seek revenge or justice? Sometimes, life's greatest tests come disguised as our deepest losses, revealing not just the character of others, but our own as well. If you found value in my story, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more life lessons from someone who has walked through fire and emerged with scars but no bitterness. Share this video with someone who might be struggling with loss or betrayal, and comment below with your own experiences of finding peace after pain. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most important property we own is not the house we live in, but the values we choose to live by.